it's not as if you're earning lots of money from your novel. So that temptation is not there. But there is a temptation to keep exploring the world you have built. When you know that you're done with the story, then the only reason for staying on is, like I said, if there is some great financial thing that's happening, and the Harry Potter story was over a long time ago. But I would say even with book 3, actually, is my controversial view. Science fiction takes our world, changes maybe one thing, two things, and then asks what if. And in doing that, it really, I think, illumines the human condition in ways that perhaps more realist novels can't do. They can do other things. You're always thinking, okay, would the legal structures of this world fit with, the social structures that I'm, putting in place, the people, and so on. I write this novel influenced and informed by my engagement with these debates in our world.
Hi everyone, I welcome you warmly to Thinkly Talks. And also these talks are offer you like a sneak preview of what's going to be there at the Mumbai International Literature Festival this weekend. And today my guest is the very illustrious Gautam Bhatia, who wears two hats. He's a legal scholar and lawyer and writer of legal matters, but he is also a very prolific science fiction writer and edits science fiction. So here, our festival is going to have him talk about his latest book, The Sentence, which is a science fiction novel, and he will also be giving a campus talk on the Constitution. So Gautam Bhatia has got his degrees from various very prestigious institutions. He studied at the National Law School in Bangalore, then was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, and then did a master's at Yale and went back to Oxford to do a PhD. And he also did a postdoc in Berlin. And so, welcome, Gautam. We are very happy to have you as part of the festival. And I just want to start by asking you, how did you become interested in science fiction? How early on did you become interested in science fiction?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. Very, very early on, since I was, I think, 10 years old, my parents got me a copy of Isaac Asimov's Foundation, which is one of the canonical texts of science fiction. And the same summer, they got me The Hobbit as well. So fantasy and science fiction, both that summer. And I instantly fell in love with the genre just because of the vast canvas that it worked on, and the sense of awe that it fills you with, when you're dealing with these issues around like deep space, deep time. The canvas is vast. So that was what got me into it. And then, of course, over the years, I read more and grew to love it even more.
So there wasn't really any one book, but these were the two kind of things that actually inspired you to.
It was starting out. It was the starting points, and as I said, I was 10 or 11 years old. I was very, very young. But as I grew into my teenage years, of course, Delhi bookshops would have stocks of Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, all famous names from a certain era. Of course, the genre has moved on beyond them, but at that time, the bookshops had Arthur Clarke, Ursula Le Guin, Gene Wolfe. These were some of those famous names of the second half of the 20th century. So I grew up on those writers, and of course, as I grew older, I explored more. And presently, the genre is, of course, much more diverse and much more. It has a lot more than just a set of writers writing from the US and the UK. But that was my trajectory over the years.
So that's been basically the bulk of your reading has been in science fiction and fantasy, or it's just one of the genres you've sort of.
Oh, I read across the board, but I have a special love for science fiction. Fantasy a little less so now, but science fiction has always been. I always seek out science fiction actively.
So could you just for our audience just kind of say what would differentiate science fiction from fantasy?
Well, I mean, this has been a long-standing argument in the genre. I think that labels obscure more than they reveal, but in a sense, in science fiction, you take the world that you have, and you maybe change a few things about it, and you use those changes to shine a light back on our world. So for example, Isaac Asimov's Nightfall is a story where you have a planet with six suns, and so at any given time there's at least one sun in the sky, so there's never nightfall, except once in 2000 years when all the suns are on the other side of the planet. And so only once in 2000 years does one generation experience nightfall and see the stars. And so he uses that idea of something as basic in our world as the night and nightfall. What if that wasn't there anymore? How would society react? And that tells us something about ourselves. And so that, I think, is science fiction at its best. Fantasy is much more untethered, let's say, from the world. It's much more a flight of imagination. But I think this is just like one point of difference. There's just a lot that unites these genres. And of course, nowadays you have the intersection of science fiction and fantasy in many books. My work also is at the intersection, and there is this broad and inclusive term called speculative fiction that covers both science fiction and fantasy. Specifically, works at the intersection of these two.
Right, especially because in your case, I suppose there is a scientific element because you're talking about people who can sleep for a century and things like that, right? So it's also about changing the social structure,
Yeah,
imagining
so
different
I mean,
social
so there is
structure.
a common misconception that science fiction means the physical sciences, so physics, mathematics, and when you have a science fiction novel, you have spaceships and complicated feats of engineering and space travel. That is, of course, a really integral part of the history of science fiction. But actually, the science in science fiction is equally social science. So other ways of imagining society, alternatives to our social organization, our political economy, so that has been always been a feature of science fiction. And so I work more in that domain. So alternative forms of social organization, utopias, or what Le Guin calls ambiguous utopias. Anarchism plays a big role, in my novel, The Sentence. And yeah, like you said, the premise is that there are people who have been frozen as punishment for a crime. And if they're proven innocent, they can be revived many years later. This is a very common SF trope, by the way. So it's often used in the context of space travel. When you have centuries of space travel, you preserve people in, a vault so that they can be revived when the journey ends, new planet. But I'm using it in this other context of the criminal law, punishment, justice, and so on.
So in the sentence, were you inspired by any specific authors for this particular novel?
Yeah, so I have an appendix at the end of the book where I list out the various inspirations that go into it. One author, of course, is like I said, Ursula Le Guin, who wrote a book called The Dispossessed, which was perhaps the first science fiction novel to really explore in depth what an anarchist society would look like in practice. How they would organize themselves, how they would solve problems, how they would build, infrastructure and so on. So in that sense, I draw from her work quite a bit. She's a legendary figure, in the history of science fiction. And the other historical source, not so much a book, that I draw from is the Paris Commune, which
Okay.
actually was a 3 month long commune that attempted to really self-govern, uh, outside of France, outside of the various structures that really constrain us. It was ultimately suppressed in a very violent, armed, army operation. But there is always it's again a very historically iconic moment when the people actually took power for themselves, and tried to govern themselves on a daily basis. So that was the other inspiration. So I have a commune in this novel that is modeled on the Paris Commune and how they struggle to survive in a hostile climate.
Oh, very interesting. So when did you realize that you actually wanted to write? It's one thing to have to consume and be a fan of science fiction,
Yeah, yeah.
but at what point did you think that, okay, I actually want to write?
Yeah, so the thing with science fiction and fantasy is that almost every writer begins as a fan, and your first exposure to writing is fan fiction. So I was no exception. When I was a teenager, I really went deep into writing fan fiction, on various online websites, and that was my first exposure to writing, and I enjoyed it so much that I was very clear that from that moment on that I wanted to be a writer of science fiction or fantasy. And I wrote fan fiction for a few years and then, transitioned into working on my own novels. But this is a really common story for this genre. I think it's unlike any other genre. Almost a large number of very famous science fiction writers and writers of fantasy have begun as fan fiction writers.
Just enlighten me. Fan fiction is
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so fan fiction basically is that you take an existing world, an existing book, and write in that universe, right? So, for example,
Oh,
Tolkien. Just a simple example. You take Middle Earth. You have the entire history of Middle Earth there. You have the elves, the dwarves, the orcs. You can then make your own character. You could be an elf. You could be, a dwarf. You could be a man. You could be an orc, and then you write your own story in that world. So you're
oh,
basically as if you're continuing Tolkien's story, right? But you are doing it. And the fan fiction worlds are there for pretty much every major novel. You'll have Harry Potter science fiction, which is a lot. There's a lot of that. There's Wheel of Time fan fiction. There is George R. R. Martin fan fiction. Yeah, and people do very creative things with fan fiction, extremely creative stuff. So that is, and as I said, and it's always a community. So you write in community. There'll be online forums. You can write together. You can write a chain story, which is what I used to do the most, writing chain stories on online forums. So other people are writing, and then of course, and that's great because it really teaches you discipline, because you can't, if you're doing a story with somebody else, you can't then be the hero, right? Like you have to be one other character in that story. You can't make it about
right,
yourself. You just learn discipline as a writer in that way, in a very good way. Yeah, so that was how I began many years of fan fiction writing.
right. And you also can't violate some of the premises of the that
Exactly,
world,
exactly.
right?
So
Yeah.
you're given the world, and you have
Mm.
to operate within that world's constraints and rules. So yeah.
So it seems like fan fiction is like it gives you an MFA almost
Well, well,
in
well.
science fiction writing.
It's a much more chaotic, and it's even an anarchic MFA, right? So no one's on your head. No one's giving you assignments. You write when you want. You write how you want. But yeah, there are you learn craft through fan
Yeah,
fiction.
it's like an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
And so when did you? So you've written two books before this of science fiction. You've
Yeah.
written four books of legal on legal matters, and you've written two, and this is your third.
Yeah.
Just for the audience, he's in his mid 30s. He's already got seven books. But so how when did you write your first book?
The first fiction novel, the first non-fiction one.
No, no, not the science fiction.
Yeah. So this was The Wall, which is part one of a two-part duology, which was published in August 2020. So it was a COVID novel, came out in the middle of COVID. Yeah, so
Okay.
that was the first one. Yeah.
How
And so,
long did you take to write
well,
that?
I mean, so I actually began thinking of it in college, which was in 2009. So
Hmm.
years, almost a decade before. And then I had one draft in college, which was actually quite bad. It's very white, like all white names, all because that's what you grow up reading all these novels, which are all, so very sort of, yeah. And then in 2014, perhaps I had a second draft. And then finally in 2018, when Harper, and I had a contract, that's where I got down to really, doing the final version. The final version took, yeah, around a year and a half to write, but it was in the making for 10 years.
Okay. And then after that, you wrote another one. Are they
Oh, that was
connected?
the sequel. The sequel was
That's a
called
sequel. Yeah, they call, yeah.
The Wall and the Horizon are one duology, two book series. Yeah.
Okay. And the sentence, how is the sentence connected?
It's
Or
a
is it
standalone, it's
completely
separate. So that world was done with The Wall and
done? Done. Okay.
that story was finished. It was told, and this is a standalone science fiction novel in a different world. Yeah, there's no connection or overlap between the sentence and The Wall and the Horizon, other than there being a one word title. So we thought that'll be a nice bit of continuity there.
Yeah. Yeah. So of course, I think I mean, if you're being a little mercenary, you could think, okay, I've created, spend all this time creating one world. Let me milk it for, let's say, like the Harry Potter world. Like, let me milk it for, three more books or whatever. So
Well, if
at
it
what?
made me millions of dollars, I'd be tempted, but but Indian SF is still very niche, So yeah, so that it's not as if you're earning lots of money from your novels. So yeah, that temptation is not there. But there is a temptation to keep exploring the world you have built. But
Yeah.
also, I think when it's done, and I think that when you know that you're done with the story, then the only reason for staying on is, like I said, if there is, some great financial thing that's happening, and
Yeah.
which I think is what's happening with Harry Potter and all these, franchises, right? Like the Harry Potter story was over a long time ago. But I would say even with book three, actually, is my controversial view. But no, it keeps on going, because it's making the author money and making,
Yeah.
not just the author, making a lot of people a lot of money.
A lot
So
of people money, yeah. So, what do you think that science fiction can do that maybe other genres can't in terms of talking about our lives today?
yeah, so like I began this conversation with it, science fiction takes our world,
Yeah,
changes maybe one thing, two things, and then asks what if. And in doing that, it really, I think, illumines a human condition in ways that perhaps more realist novels can do. They can do other things. So, for example, as in my novel, this idea that you develop this technology where you can preserve people, in a vault, in sub-zero temperatures, and then revive them years later. And instead of using that for good, you end up using that as a punishment, right? So you instead of sentencing someone to death, you sentence them to the sleep of death, and say, okay, if we find out you're innocent, we'll bring you back many years later. So I think so that shifts this one thing about our world where death is irreversible, to a world where death is reversible. And so then I can use that to ask questions about justice, ethics, the idea of punishment. What is punishment? Would our instinctive opposition to death penalty still be so strong if it was reversible? So all those questions. I think the best science fiction does that. Like it because it has the liberty to build a world that is both recognizable to us, but also defamiliarized. That bit of non-familiarity is then the space where the questions are asked, which then compels us to think more deeply about our worlds, the things we take for granted, the things we assume are fixtures, but they're contingent, all those things.
so I'm sure, of course, all your work on constitutional law, free speech, all that obviously adds nuance and sophistication to your science fiction, and you must be drawing heavily on those.
Well, I mean, so it depends upon the book. So the first two books, not so much. More, I think, works of fantasy. Though, of course, I mean, law constitutes the hidden plumbing of the world, among other things. And so once you've seen that, it's you can't unsee it as a lawyer. So you always think to yourself, is the world I'm making, is it legally coherent as well? Though, of course, the readers won't see that because you don't talk about the law, in the novel, but you do. You're always thinking, okay, would the legal structures of this world fit with the social structures that I'm putting in place, the people and so on. But of course the sentence is much more embedded in law. I mean, the premise is the death penalty, punishment, crime, criminal justice and so on. So there, of course, I write this novel influenced and informed by my engagement with these debates in our world, specifically around capital punishment, just the idea of punishment, of crime, and of various other things. Yeah.
That's very fascinating. So tell me, you've written books on legal issues, then you write regularly for the popular press, and you have a blog, which I must tell you is very popular with my husband. And yesterday itself, you've written something based on a 90-page judgment, and then you're doing science fiction. So I just wonder, how do you like? What is your writing routine like?
Well, so because a bit of the day job is a little chaotic, as a practicing lawyer, you can't really tell when work will come and when you'll have free time. So then you can't really have conditions on when you'll work and when you'll write. So it is essentially when time presents itself, you take it and you use it to write. And when it's not there, then you have to just reconcile to it. So I think you just have to live with a certain degree of chaos. I do tell people though that but when you are neck deep into a fiction project, then losing momentum is very damaging. So once
Yeah,
once you really get into it, I think, and I'm done with the outlining and all of that. Once I am in the writing phase, I ring fence time. So it'll be say 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Will be writing time, come what may. And I just assume that the day has 22 hours for other work, not 24 hours. So yeah, so I think like there are two things. One is you have to get used to a certain degree of chaos in the writing process, but also then when you're in it, then you have to have a discipline that makes you do a little bit every day at least.
Yeah, because I mean, it's continuity and being immersed is very important. So, do you then just decline like cases or like when you're in a very crucial
Well,
period?
my practice actually, so I'm not a traditional lawyer in the sense that 10 matters a day in all the courts. It is a very low key practice, and so far there's not been a problem. I've been able to balance the practice, legal writing, and fiction. If it changes, I will obviously start declining cases because I don't want to lose out on this part of my life. But right now,
Right.
it's nice balance.
Yeah, but also the style of writing is different, right? In your legal writing, it's more argumentation. You're trying to make a point, so it's more it's rhetoric, principles
Yeah.
of rhetoric. Whereas here, you're telling a story, so there's got to be an emotional content. I mean,
Well,
storytelling is
also
different
legal
from.
writing it has to be direct, precise, austere, very spare. Fiction is indirect. You can't. I mean, the whole point is in fiction is to be indirect and to communicate, emotions, feelings through being indirect. And of course, written argumentation and spoken dialogue are very different. And so when you have dialogue in fiction, so yeah, there's a lot of unlearning to do from legal writing to fiction writing. It's a massive amount of unlearning, and then just like mentally
Yeah,
switching.
because it's very different, especially if you have to wade through these 90-page judgments of kind of viscous prose.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So I just want to switch gear a little bit. You've lived in Delhi, you brought up in Delhi, grew up in Delhi, you studied in Bangalore, then you were in Oxford, then you were in New Haven, then you were at Berlin. What's your favorite city, and you've been to many big like cities. So what did you like about each of them? Just you can mention one about
Well, I
each.
mean, my favorite city is none of them. My favorite city is Melbourne because the cold coffee. It has the best cold coffee in the world, and I'm addicted to cold coffee. So just for that, of course, Melbourne has lovely bookshops and all that. But yeah, I love it for the cold coffee. But no, I mean, I think all cities have their own things to recommend themselves. And I think it depends a lot on what emotional state you are in when you are in that city, because a lot of it really depends on that. So like if you had a breakup in a city, you'll always see it through that lens, like so
Yeah.
you know that these places they'll mean something different to you. On the other hand, if you have if you have lived in a city and just had free time to explore, hike, it'll mean something else. So I think yeah, it just depends on what phase of life and what emotional state you are in that defines your relationship to a city.
Right. So, but how was your time at Oxford? I think you've spent considerable amount of
I
time
spent
there.
5 years, 5 years in Oxford.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful place. It's like a little slice of, a little slice of paradise where you have your lakes, forests. You can just leave your home and walk, and there's a forest in 5 minutes, 5 minutes walking distance. And of course, it's the architecture is quite, yeah. I mean, it's you see beauty every morning, and you get used to it very soon, and you stop seeing it. But also it's a place you want to, I think, spend time in and then leave because it's at some point it feels like life is elsewhere, this is a nice break, but real life is elsewhere. But again, this is no shade on people who make Oxford their home at all. So,
Yeah. Well, if you come from India, everything else seems a little, just that little bit duller.
yeah, nothing can match the chaos, I guess.
Yeah. So we have some questions from our viewers. Someone asks, how do you feel about the growing popularity of science fiction in the mainstream media?
I think it's really good because I think for a long time, science fiction, I mean, there was no such thing as English language Indian science fiction. It was only mythological fiction, which of course sold and sells very, very well. And there was a bit of Indian fantasy. But this idea that Indians would write science fiction in the tradition of science fiction was not there for a very long time. And I think that finally that is changing because writers are now there. Publishers are willing to take risks on science fiction,
Mhm.
commercial risks. Editors and reviewers are there. Yesterday, I was at JNU and they are running 2 courses on Indian and global science fiction in the master's program. And I was giving a talk and there were 100 people, in the room just to listen to and discuss science fiction at JNU. So I think that's fantastic. And I think the media catching up is also really good because the only way I think we can develop a reading public for Indian science fiction is with the infrastructure around it. Publishers, imprints, and the media is a crucial role to play in that.
Right, right. And since I'm sitting in Bombay now, basically I know that, Professor Jayant Narlikar used to write
Yes.
science fiction in
Yeah.
Marathi. And there is a Marathi science fiction club because I was kind of trying to get them interested in the
Yeah.
session for the festival.
So
So,
Maharashtra, Bengal, and Tamil Nadu are the three places which have a long history of SF in their own languages. These three
I
regions of
see.
India have a long history of SF in their own languages.
Oh, that's very interesting. Okay. So someone else asks, are there any lesser known science fiction works or authors that you feel people should explore?
Are they what? Sorry, what was the first word?
Some lesser known,
Lesser
not
known.
lesser
Lesser known.
known
Okay,
science
okay.
fiction works or
Okay.
authors that you think that people should explore.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's all. I'll give a few recommendations. It's always hard because I don't know, since I am so deep in the industry. People whose names I think are very well known, are not very well known outside. So, but let me try. I love this Cuban punk rocker biochemist science fiction writer called Yoss Yoss. So he's like a complete maverick, and he has this brilliant novel called A Planet for Rent, where Earth has become a holiday resort for aliens, and
Or for
for highly developed alien
aliens.
species. They treat Earth like we would treat Goa, right? So with
Okay.
all the problems that come with that. So yeah, so it's a series of short stories. It's like really good. He has other novels called Super Extra Grande, like really interesting. Yeah, I really like his work. Like he's fabulous. One writer who is, well, I mean, within the industry, he is very, very well known, is Alistair Reynolds. I don't know how much he's read outside, but I think he does the best space opera presently. Just these big questions of space, time, eternity. Yeah. And my favorite book by him is the House of Suns, SUNS, House of Suns. So I like that a lot. I have a newsletter actually where I do recommendations every fortnight on Substack. So if people are interested,
Oh, okay. That's very
yeah.
interesting.
So
Okay.
every fortnight, it's my name.substack.com. So I recommend SF every fortnight on that newsletter. Yeah.
So, but if you're on Substack and you're reading, I mean, you're reading what, like short stories or like you're recommending novels?
Novels, yeah. So there's one section in the newsletter where I do what I'm reading this week or these couple of weeks, which is always some science fiction, some literary fiction. And then at the end, I have a recommendations corner where I try and recommend like lesser known, novelists. So someone who's not really on the bestseller lists in India. Yeah, try and make it representative in terms of region, gender, and so on. So I think that recommendations corner might be helpful for people who are looking for
Yeah.
lesser known science fiction writers.
But that means you must be reading voraciously also to have something to say every 2 weeks.
If you're writing, you have to be a reader. You can't write without being a reader, right? So,
Of course,
yeah.
yeah. And so, what is another viewer asks, what is the most fun part of writing?
I think the most fun part of writing, yeah, I think it is the very beginning. When so I always begin with one image in my head and the ending. So I know the ending, and there's one image which is there, and then I build a novel around that. And in the beginning, when it's all you're just playing around, with in the sandbox, it's just completely open. I think that's the best part. Once it starts getting serious, then world building starts, and you have to make sure the world is internally coherent, externally plausible, and then characters start to have their own lives, and they start to dictate you're taking them. So I think all that then is hard. But I think yeah, I think the beginning of it is really the most fun part, when the whole world is open for you.
You've already mentioned, so we'll just end with this question. What is the most difficult part? You just said that once you start the actual getting the nitty gritty and the details,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, I
what
mean,
you.
so for me, the most difficult part are the fillers, right? So there is, and this is something that many people have talked about. There is that, so you have a scene, say an action scene, right, where things happen, and it's great, and you're loving writing it. And then the next scene is 2 days later, in a forest. What
Mhm.
happened in between that time, right? So there has to be something you have to connect the reader from like fun scene A to fun scene B, just to let them know how you got there. And that is really, really painful because, you don't want to write that. You just want to just write the fun scenes, but, just connecting the threads between the scenes. I think for me has always been just tedious and painful and hard. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, thank you everybody for tuning in to Thinkly. And you can find many more of these talks on the Thinkly app in the LitFest community. And we hope to catch all of you at the Literature Festival this weekend. It opens on Friday and it goes on till Sunday evening. And we especially would like viewers of this talk to all come to the session on science fiction, at which one of the novels that will be discussed is Gautam's The Sentence. Thank you all for tuning in.